I've been having some trouble with the this one. It's a Dutton with a Zetec engine, and the trouble I've been having is to do with the fuel filter getting blocked up and fuel starvation. So what I've just been doing, because it seems to be taking a mysteriously long time to get a replacement filter, I've filled it. I've just poured fuel into it, and pouring it was just a tissue in a funnel, and pouring it back to see what comes out, basically. So I'm washing out my fuel filter. This is actually the second time I've done it. I'll wait for that to drain out. Actually, perhaps I will do it a third time. Right, so it's now full of fuel, which I can luckily seal off with my fingers. And originally I was going to do this with in a bath, but I couldn't think of a thing that I could use as a bath. So after a little while waiting for that to drain through, can you see this? It's not looking good, is it? And so we have this, which is remarkably similar, probably the same as some stuff that we've got as a pre-filter before this filter, and that got blocked up, which is what started all this. So I thought I'd look at the post filter that's after the main fuel pump. Actually, I think it's before the main fuel pump. Anyway, I can't remember which order the pumps are in now. Anyway, whatever. It was more solid looking like crystals. Actually, it looked a bit like brown sugar, albeit it was soft. So I'm going to have another go. I can keep this one. Let's put another tissue out. I'll leave that, set that to one side, and see if I can find any more. So I'm going to do the same procedure as before. Again, I'm going to focus on the input side of the filter. Put my finger over one end, put some fuel in from this can. Right, that appears to be full now, so I could give it a good shake around. Yeah, so we have that brown sugar stuff looking is actually soft. So here we have it. This was the first filter that came out of the fuel filter, first time through the funnel, the second time through the funnel, the third time through the funnel. Well, in fact that's actually got a little bit of collection between the two cans as well, which is actually what these are, where I poured fuel between the two cans, and it has collected a bit of this stuff that looks like brown sugar but which is actually soft. So I suspect that's what this is actually. There's just a little bit more that collected, but the black stuff there is what I think came out of the actual filter. This was the second time through, and that was the first time through. So I'd like to think anyway, this time, since it's basically clear, the fuel filter is now clear. And after it's been lying out here drying for an hour or so, yeah, that's the these are the papers that went when I just poured stuff between the two fuel cans. This stuff may have been present in the bottom of the can already. but these ones are what came out of the filter itself. I've been having some trouble with this one, and the symptom is of the fuel running out, but you put more fuel in and it makes no difference, or very little difference. Investigating it a bit further, I've for the second time washed out the fuel filter, and what came out was revolting. It seems to have covered itself up. So this has been here for a few hours, but this substance that I'll zoom in on visually looks a bit like brown sugar, and I've literally just washed the filter out in the direction of the incoming, and it was a lot bigger than this to start with, but it's kind of dried up. In fact, I had several goes, keeping it for posterity for the moment, several goes that have greater or lesser amounts of horrible stuff in, as you can see. So yeah, so what is it and how to stop it? That's the question. So I've literally did that by using a fuel can, a funnel, a piece of kitchen roll folded up like this to make a filter paper like we might have had in school, and pour the fuel out of the filter, shaking it like this, having filled it up first, of course, and that was the result. So what's all that about then? It certainly prevented the car from running properly. So of course the suspicion is always ethanol, right? Whether it's E5 or E10. And in here I have some of the fuel that was in the car, which has been sat here overnight. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see that? There's a layer. Where's my focus? Let's sort of zoom out a bit. So I don't know if you can see this, but there's a layer. This isn't thick glass down here. In fact, if I move it around here, it kind of moves. And that, I think, is ethanol with water dissolved in it. That layer. And I got this from Auto Shenanigans, actually, as a method of, well, he used it as a method of working out how much ethanol there is. And I'll also point out that there's a sort of cloudy thing which is at the border, and which is clearly, the cloudy stuff is clearly the same stuff as we've just been looking at outside. Now this was, yeah, I can now see it moving around. Let's get some light on it, make it do that again. Can you see that? So that's clearly the same thing. When it was, or it's now, I've now stirred it up again. I measured the height of the column here, and it came to about 14 centimeters as measured, and the height of the layer was about 7, which is, funnily enough, about 5%, 5 or 6%, which is actually the same amount that that John from Auto Shenanigans measured for E10. So I think he said that it was between 5, 6, maybe 7%, so not actually 10, although it could be up to, he said. Yeah, and it has obviously absorbed water out of the atmosphere or wherever. And one thing I will also mention is that the clear layer is actually now a lot clearer than it was when I first put it in there. So yeah, that's a problem, and I've got about well, I've got some in the can outside. The blue car is now empty. I've drained it completely, but this car has got some of the same fuel in it, and in fact the Gilburn has got the same fuel in it as well, because I've been kind of moving cans worth of fuel around from car to car, so presumably it's all got the same problem, and that is very far from ideal. So the question is, what do I do about it? So I could empty it all out and then somehow dispose of it. And I don't know what you do with old fuel. Oil I can take to the tip, fuel, don't know. So what I'm going to see if I can do is separate it out. So that's my idea, to make a much larger version of the jam jar. If we assume that it's about 5 or 6%, and even though this piece of drain pipe isn't transparent, we can estimate, or measure in fact, where that bottom see-through layer or different layer is likely to come to if this was full up. So it's going to be roughly there, I think. I shall measure it, obviously, and if I fill it up with fuel, leave it to settle, and I have a spout that's higher up, then we should be able to drain it out without the ethanol and without the water. And that's what I'm going to try and do. So, one thing we need is obviously a stopper. Well, I've got a stopper, but I need to make a hole and have a side connector at a certain height. Okay, so I'm going to assume that I'm not going to fill it right up. Yeah, 1 metre should be 1 metre. 1 metre is here, but we don't need to know where the top is. We need to know where 5% is. It means actually 5 centimetres from the bottom, which is here, just above this kind of ridge. Now I might be a bit more conservative and actually put it slightly higher than that. Right, let's go for it. That goes on. Now of course one of the problems I've got here is that this metal plate is flat and that's round. But I'm hoping that I can tighten it up, and the too small, and the plastic is flexible enough to deform, so that it does actually tighten up without actually. Yeah, I reckon that's worked actually. Yeah, so my round pipe has now got a flat spot on it. Alright, so that is my tap, and here is my stopper, which I can now put on. So, ooh, need to get you back. So here is my tower with a drain cock which I can open and close. So the objective would be to put the fuel in here, leave it to settle, and then drain it out, except for the last bit, which is a mixture of ethanol and water, which I can throw away, or perhaps if there's still usable fuel in there, I could simply do it with the jam jar again. Anyway, let's see what happens. Right, now I do realise this is a bit sketchy, because if a load of fuel gets spilt in here, that would be very bad. Well, it's for that reason I've switched the potential sources of ignition off, being the bench here, and I'm going to put this fuel can, and probably this tap is going to be too high, but that's fine because I can do the jam jar experiment afterwards. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to empty the jam jar, actually it's coffee jar, I'm going to empty the coffee jar complete with its nasty mixture. And there's absolutely no sign of any leaking, by the way. So according to my mathematical skill, I've got, well, it'll be about 6 litres in here. So the diameter of this pipe internally is 10 centimetres. So going with the pi r squared to get the cross-sectional area, so that's 25 5 squared times 3.14, which is pi, so that's pi r squared, so that's 78.5 cross-sectional area. I've got about, well, let's call it 6 litres. So 6,000 divided by 78.5 equals 76.4. So I'm not exactly sure how high up that is, but it's about here. I might as well get my ruler. Right, 76 is actually here. So we'll have some good fuel down to about there, but this tap can be used to take off the amount from around about 10%, and then we can do a jam jar experiment to see what comes out. Right, so I've done that. So we should be full up to about there, I think I said. And what I need to do now is let it settle. Right, this has been stood now for about an hour and a half maybe. I reckon that's good enough, or long enough I should say. So set about draining it out, and if my calculations are correct, the Duff fuel should stop around about this height, well below the level of the tap. So this should all be good stuff. But what's left could be as much as 30% of ethanol with water in it. And when I've drained this as much as possible, we can do the same experiment with the glass jar with the remainder. Right. So that should be good fuel. And what's in here is what's left over. So this is my jar of probable dodgy fuel, and already we can see a layer of sediment, which I wasn't really expecting, to be honest. But considering that it was taken from 5 litres of fuel out of a can, 5 litres, let's say 10% of 5 litres is 50 centilitres. You should see a line that could be as much as halfway up here, but we'll have to leave that to settle to see if that's true or not. Interesting stuff, this. Right, now this is the jar which was the residue at the bottom end of this pipe thing, and I was expecting it to be about 2 or 3. Actually, maybe I should do the maths. How much is in this jar compared to in that? Come back in a moment. Right, it looks like the volume of this jar is about a litre. They're sold, it's coffee jar. They're sold by the gram, which doesn't make it very easy to know the volume. But I've got a similar sized thing I compared it with, and I measured that out with a kitchen measuring jug. So it's about a litre, maybe a little bit less. And this, when it's full up, is, well, I think it's 5 litres up there, so it may be 6 litres in total. In rough numbers. So 1 litre to 6 litres, so you'd expect if the fuel was all the same, there to be 6 times as much residue at the bottom. Now, I don't think there is 6 times as much. I measured the depth of it before as being 7 millimetres, and it is now, it's about 15. So it is just over twice as much as it was before, from about 6 times as much. So twice as much compared to 6 times as much volume in total, twice as much depth of rubbish. So what does this mean? Well, it might mean that the ethanol that's in here, which is what causes this separation to happen, isn't completely saturated in water. So there could still be ethanol up here, which hasn't got any water in it. So actually I think that's quite likely to be the situation. The other thing that's worthy of note, because of course you can't see into this, and I was a little unsure as to how long to leave this to settle. Now this has only been 15-20 minutes, and it's not only looking like a solid layer there, but it's also looking quite clear. So I suspect this doesn't actually take very long at all. So what I think I'll do now is I'll suck this out and just join it with this, and I'll leave the horrible layer behind. Yeah, my layer seems to be undisturbed. I thought it might all kind of blow up like sediment in a fish tank. So, after a little bit further jiggery pokery, this is the residue that's left. I've sucked out all the non-dodgy looking layer, so we've got a layer of what could be, I don't know, ethanol with water, and then this browny sedimenty layer. And if you look inside, it doesn't look very good, does it? Anyway, I'm going to pour that away now, Actually, the structure of that stuff is not overly different to what was collected in those tissues. So what I'm going to do now, this hopefully is all good stuff. I'm going to pour some what I hope is good fuel into the jar, and hopefully we won't see any layers develop. So after an hour or so, the test fuel that came from the can had been cleaned, as it were, is clear. It's still clear. I'm just wondering if there's a very slight haze around the bottom, but obviously it's way clearer than it was before. Actually, there is. I've just been pouring it back, and there is a little tiny bit. So what does this prove? Not sure. Now, because I've become obviously a little bit paranoid about fuel quality, state, whatever, I've actually drained the tank out of this, which is hasn't been driven for about a month. I got 2 not quite full fuel cans out of it, so that's probably about, I don't know, 8 litres there. And I'm going to do the same thing, especially starting with this one, which, well, I can't do it all in one go, I don't think, because the thing's not big enough. But let's see if there's any difference between them as well. Okay, so the fuel that I put in there has now been there for about an hour and a half. So I'm going to put it back in the fuel can. Will be the fuel out of the yellow car, and we'll look at the combined residue from about 8 litres, and it will be at the bottom here, but we'll come back and look at that in an hour or so. Right, so this one has had an hour to settle, so I'll drain this one out as well. Okay, so we now have the last can in my column, and we have the one I just dealt with. It's still in its glass jar over there, which we will see if it separates out. And looking at it, I think it's going to be completely clear. As I suspected, there is absolutely no dodgy layer of fuel in there, even after about an hour. This appearance that looks like a fairly reasonable white wine is obviously the colour that it should be, and that's actually distinctly cleaner than the fuel I dealt with earlier on today. So that gives me a bit of a problem actually, because some of that has gone in here. Might have to come out again. So predictably enough, the other jar of fuel an hour or so later was absolutely the same as it was when I started. The colour of a nice glass of white wine. So this is the fuel that went through the process right at the beginning. It came out of the blue car, and I'm going to leave this overnight. And I've actually managed to find a stopper to put in the top, which I didn't have up to now. It's actually the lid from a pot of Ice Upon P38 body filler, believe it or not, which is a pretty good fit up there. So yeah, I'm going to leave that until the morning and see if anything changes. Any more sediment, any more layers, or is it just the colour that's changed? So I've let the column of fuel settle overnight, and I've just emptied out the main part into the fuel can, and I'll just put the remainder into the glass jar. So this has now been standing for probably half an hour, actually not that much, but yeah, the colour's better. It may, no, it's indistinguishable really from the fresher lot. So it does appear that a slight cloudiness and so on I saw at the beginning, let alone the layer of whatever that was, has gone. So my column is quite well proven, I think. So flashback, this is like, I think it's 10 centimetres in internal diameter, plastic drain pipe, bought from Wix DIY, with a plastic stopper that goes in the end. This is all kind of rubber grommet, and I think there's a bit of a metal thing in there as well, and that does more than a good enough job of sealing fuel inside. This connector here is just a tank connector, and even though this is obviously curved and that's flat, the flexibility of the plastic pipe is sufficient. I was able to tighten it up anyway, and the rest of it's just standard 15mm plumbing stuff. And the whole point of it is because we know that the ethanol watery fraction of fuel is a small fraction, and it sits at the bottom because it's heavier than fuel. My tap being here, and in fact I think at no point did we get higher than here, or here maybe, as far as the grotty layer was concerned. So I was able to tap that off at a higher level into a fuel can, and the rest, well, you can either throw it away I suppose, or do as I did and do the whole thing again using a glass jar and then suck it out with a big syringe. If you want to do that, saves a bit of waste and maybe a bit of pollution as well. But anyway, I think I'm done with this now. I now have several cans of clean fuel, and it can go back in the car. If you got as far as this, thanks very much for watching, and in case you haven't already, please do consider subscribing. That would be really encouraging for me. So catch you on the next one.